Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I will be interviewing an incredible musician called Sean Corby. Now Sean Corby has recently hit the headlines with his landmark court case to do with safeguarding his opinions. You know, Sean has been a critic of some of the ideologies associated with identity politics, intersectionality and critical race theory. But what's fascinating about Sean is he's a jazz musician, and he's worked at a high level within the UK jazz music scene. And this interview is going to really explore the British jazz scene. You're going to learn about how that worked. He's going to hear about some of the experiences working with some of the great musicians that this country's produced. He's going to be talking about jazz education and also his experiences more recently with this court case. This is an absolutely fascinating story. Now, this interview is a long interview, so I've broken it down into three parts. The first part will be Sean explaining his experience as a musician and with his background as sort of a working class guy, and how he moved into this incredible music scene and some of the experiences he had then. And then the second part will be looking at some of the issues around race and identity that affected him and how they affected him. And then the last part will be a discussion of the court case, and we'll have a bit of a discussion around our opinion of it. Now, I'm very aware that we both, people go, well, these two white guys talking about this, but that is exactly the point. Can we have an opinion about it? Well, according to the British courts, because of Sean's case, yes, we can have an opinion, because that opinion has to be protected within the UK law. So this is a really interesting thing. Now, I've touched upon all this on this channel, and so some of you will probably be a little bit prepped. You may want to go off, stop this video and have a bit of a Google of Sean before we start. But I tell you, this interview is absolutely incredible. I've just finished it and I've rushed in here, and I'm going to film a little bit of a sort of conclusion at the end, of why I think this is an important discussion to have. So anyway, I will now pass it over to Sean, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Mr. Sean Corby.
Position, okay.
Hello everybody, very pleased to have someone who's become a good friend of mine, I hope, Mr. Sean Corby. We've been chatting a lot over the last few weeks, and the way we met is quite an interesting story. Sean, you're sort of involved in a legal case at the moment, aren't you?
That's right. Yeah. With my employer.
Yeah. So I saw this. This is quite a big news story. But what piqued my interest is when I was looking at it, you're actually a jazz musician, aren't you? So I thought, well, this is really good, and I was interested in this bit because of all the mainstream sort of media outlets aren't focusing so much on your illustrious jazz career. So I thought I'd give you a message and have a chat about that, and then see how this has impinged, more recent events has impinged on that. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and, what you play and what you've done, where you're born,
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andy. I mean, when I got the message from you, it was great to hear from you. And last week when we spoke informally, it's a great conversation, very inspiring actually. So I felt really grateful for you contacting me, and subsequently been thinking a lot about what we spoke. And we because of my legal case being centered around race, some of what we talked about in relation to the music also went in a little bit to race and jazz and the history, etc., and our experience of playing it. So I'm a trumpet player. I say I'm a trumpet player, but I'm a comeback player at the minute because I took a 5-year sabbatical hiatus, whatever you call it, and last year started playing again. I stopped in 2018 and took a day job, a straight gig, and that's the job that I've got this legal issue with at the minute. But during that time, I lost a couple of teeth, the middle teeth here, just ill health, not looking after him. I'm a 70s kid, and we ate lots of sugar and didn't clean our teeth properly and whatever. So lost these
70s
teeth.
king and then a jazz musician.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that I'd never play again. I saw my trumpets. Vowed never to play again.
And
There
this
was a
would have
lot.
been because of the embouchure issues that
Well,
you
there
had.
was that, but also, I mean, as we'll kind of maybe touch on, I've had this tension with playing with music anyway. This kind of a love hate, should I, shouldn't I, all or nothing relationship with music for a long time. And in fact, some of the things that we spoke about creativity and anxiety and mental health, and I watched your video, really, really fascinating, and I felt that absolutely applied to myself and my experience. But in 2018, I was playing with Jar Wobble, who I've been playing with for about maybe 9 or 10 years, and we were about to go to record with Bill Laswell, to do an album with Bill Laswell. And at one point there was talk about Pharaoh Sanders playing on it. And then Pharaoh was going to be away when we were going to be there. So they were on about John Zorn coming in and playing on it. And
this is why I wanted to get in touch with you, because when I started to talk to you, I thought, oh my God, my channel, your story. So if you're watching this, viewers, Sean's story is fascinating, because not only is he a jazz player, but he's also been he's been playing in the circles of some of the people that we really get into on this, on my channel. Pharaoh Sanders, John Zorn, Bill Laswell. That's all the stuff we love. That's an incredible opportunity, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, it was really exciting, but it was at that point that I packed it in and said, I'm going to go to Bill Laswell's studio, which I think was Frankie Valli's studio, right, in New Jersey, and all this history. And there were some gigs lined up over there and what have you. And Wobble was really going to feature me on this album. Now, just on that, he was somebody that I think maybe one of the very few people that I feel that has seen me, right? I've always kind of felt a bit invisible for different reasons, and like an observer looking in, on the outside llooking in. I've never really felt like.
Is this in the jazz world, do you mean, or with
in general?
Yeah.
I think, and there's reasons for it in the jazz world, and we can get into some of that. But Wobble, I think, because he's from a working class background, he met me and he liked the cut of my jib, should we say. He liked my playing. He's really into Miles, and he was listening to, when I met him, he was listening to a lot of like Big Fun era stuff and Dark Magus and all of that. And he was like Willie Part 1, Willie Part 2, or Big Fun, Genevieve, all that era.
He's
of
an
stuff.
incredible player, and the breadth of that guy, fascinating guy. I've got an album with him that he did with Brian Eno, and then I can't say his name, Jackie the drummer from.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
That's an incredible album, that is, and it's stuff he's done right from Pill. I love Public Image Limited. All the stuff he's done is unbelievable. So it's an incredible artist to work with, and for him to love your playing is a real, testament to you. I think, because I think that he's left field. You see, this is what I like about jazz. One of the problems I have with the contemporary jazz scene is how much can you come through doing something that's not just the conservative norm. But I know the people who are watching this, they're going to wonder, how did you get to the point where you're playing with Jar Wobble and you're about to go off to record with John Zorn at Bill Laswell Studios? How did you get to that point?
Well, I mean, if we go right back to the beginning, grew up in Huddersfield, which is in the north of England, West Yorkshire, a industrial town. It's a town that really developed during the Industrial Revolution, mill workers, textiles, a gritty sort of place. And I grew up there, and I got into playing the trumpet at school. I think they came around and they said, like, you can play the violin, the clarinet, or the trumpet. And I was like, the trumpet, I'm going to play the trumpet. And the reason being, I was really into like playing with toy soldiers and army and all that at the time. And I liked the idea of playing bugle calls. And in fact, the first thing that I learned to play or teach myself to play was reveille, the bugle call. So I started playing the trumpet.
Would you have lasted 5 minutes playing the violin in Huddersfield?
No, I mean, I got rid of playing the trumpet. But it had a huge brass band scene.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing cultural phenomenon.
believe it or not, because nobody knows this, I've actually worked on the brass band scene for a short while as well. Yeah,
really?
I've played with some championship section brass bands, and I once did one of those competitions, where the judge sits inside the little shed and has a bucket to go to the toilet in. I did one of those. Yeah, I got a drummer dropped out, and they called me up and said you could do it. And it was a horrendous reading gig. I'm not a great reader, and I had to read like this 20-minute piece, but an incredible breeding ground for immensely talented musicians. That's one thing I realised.
Yeah. I mean, just an amazing cultural phenomenon is all of that serious level playing. But I just kind of got into it, and at home, my dad played a lot of soul music. He was kind of like a bit of a tail end of the mods, and he was really into soul music and a lot of other stuff like Doobie Brothers and Stephen Stills, Richie Havens, all that kind of stuff. My dad was very politicized. He was a trade unionist and very involved in the labour movement. He was a bricklayer by trade, but then he got into the trade union movement. He was a trade union official, and he got quite senior in that. But the reason why I say that is because from a very, very early age, I was aware of like sort of, I would say, let's for want of a better description, race consciousness, in that he was telling me about these musicians we were listening to. These are black musicians, and he spoke about some of the historical and cultural context as he saw it at the time about these musicians and that music and the history of it, etc. So even like, I'm talking like really young, like 8 or 9 years old, right? And he was telling me this, and I was kind of getting it. At the same time, his dad, who was a foundry worker, really loved big bands. So I'd be around at his house, and I was playing the trumpet, and he'd be playing Louis Armstrong, he'd be playing Woody Herman, Charlie Barnett, all of these kind of big band musicians, and I was getting into it. But I didn't even know there was such thing as a professional trumpet player. And then at school, we had in Huddersfield, as I've mentioned in videos recently, a really very visible and present West Indian population, right? And there were clubs, music venues, and then kids at school were into stuff. And from as early as I can remember, I was kind of drawn to that music and that culture and that scene, right? Why? I don't know, but
it's the same with me. It's like an identical thing. Now, Dad played me loads of jazz, and he'd put on Oscar Peterson, and you go, "This guy is the greatest pianist in the world." And I pick up the picture and look at Oscar on the front and go, "Oh my God, that's the greatest pianist in the world." And I can remember played so much of that music. And then when I went to college, I'd gone to a party, and they were playing the Smiths and the Cure at this party, a bunch of students. And the bass player in the band I was in, Tony, was in a reggae band, West Indian guy. He came up to this, he go, "What are they listening to?" And I was going, "I don't know." So we go to another party, and I remember he led me out of this down the road. He went to another party, and it was like this heavy reggae, dub reggae. And as soon as I walked in, I felt at home. I didn't feel at home with the students listening to the Smiths. I felt at home there. I've always been drawn to that. And it's not just, it's like Indian music has the same thing for me as well. There's like a flavor, isn't there? There's a flavor to it. Like the blues has got it, reggae's got it, funk, jazz, Indian music's got it. I hear it in sort of certain gypsy music, flamenco's got it. Did you chime with all that rather than
yeah. It's funny because I don't get it with South African music, but stuff of like West African music and even like Ganawa.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's what I've noticed it, and not with West African, North African music. Master musicians of Jajuka, all that sort of stuff seems to have a thread, a beautiful thread that spoke to me when I was very, very young.
Yeah, that's right, and nothing that sounded too happy for me. There was something about the that pathos, the personality, and say with Indian classical music and things. There's something about that kind of sound, as you said, Dwayne and all that. But yeah, I was into that, and then I had a teacher when I went to secondary school, and I mentioned that I was into jazz and big bands, and of course he found this really weird because like none of the other kids were into anything like that. I was just in this world of my own, and he told me about Miles Davis, and I liked the sound of the name. I'd never heard of him, and then my dad brought me home this like Dizzy Gillespie compilation and it was all vinyl those days, wasn't it? It was like the
Yeah.
cover, the actual thing just felt so good to have this thing, and the visuals and the liner notes, read the liner notes, and you put it on and the crackle and the whole thing, a bit this new music, you know. And I started going to the library, Huddersfield Library, and a massive jazz selection of books and records.
Mm.
And I just started exploring and getting into this music. And I was getting into all sorts, you know, Art Ensemble Chicago, Louis Armstrong. I'd bring home like Fats Waller, anything that I could get my hands on. I was listening to it, and I was kind of getting that there's a thread that connects. I didn't see it as being, you know, different. Just listening to all of it, and then one of the things that happened was that Archie Shepp was coming to Leeds, and I knew about Archie Shepp. I'd heard about Archie Shepp, and I'd read bits about him and seen these album titles and these track titles, Malcolm, Siempre Malcolm, and Fire Music and all this. And I guess I'd have been about maybe 13 or 14. And I'd started to do some reading and my own investigation and things into that cultural side of it and the politics of that and what. So I was kind of aware. But then Archie Shepp came to Leeds Trades Club, 1985, I think this was. And he was playing with his quartet. And it was at the time when he did an album called Soul Song. And Leeds Trades Club was in Chapeltown, and it was like an old working men's club, and Leeds Jazz was based there. And my dad took me, and he said, you better be ready for this, because it's going to be like really serious. And I was like 13, 14. And Archie Shepp, man, I mean, it was packed, this place. And you know, in those days, people were smoking inside, and the whole thing was there. And Archie Shepp came on stage, and he had this straw boater hat and this pipe. And he started to playing, and the drummer, I can't remember, I think Kenny Werner was on piano, but the drum, it might have been Stafford James maybe on bass, I can't remember. The drummer had this polo neck, black polo neck, this guy is, and I was just mesmerised by it. And then he did Mama Rose with the poem and everything. And it's like, I didn't know what he was talking about, but it was really, I could hear this stuff, it's like really powerful. Archie Shepp, man, and it was that, I thought, this is like, you know, but there was no access to information in those days about how to learn to play.
I can remember in 1985, I'm sure, Channel 4 ran a series of jazz concerts. Carla Bley was on it, and Archie Shepp was on
it called
that.
Sounds of something or other? You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that may have been the same tour, mightn't it? It's that, because that's when I first saw Archie Shepp, and I can remember he had the pipe on this concert. It was incredible. Yeah. And I checked him out, and seeing someone like Archie Shepp as close at that time to seeing John Coltrane, isn't it? It's a direct line to the source, isn't it, with Archie Shepp?
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah, it's so funny those. I remember Carla Bley, you know, the great late now Carla Bley. She had a concert on there, and I think there was a something with John Marshall, who's also died this year. You know, on drum. There was a series of concerts. I remember that Archie Shepp one. It was mind blowing.
Yeah.
Spiritual music.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and so I was getting into all of that, and then there was on one Sunday there was a Sunday supplement, and I opened this Sunday supplement, and Courtney Pine, and there was a photo of Courtney Pine. There was a big spread. Now that's the first time I'd seen or heard of him, so it would have been about 85, 86. And Courtney was there. I think he had this red dicky ball on, and he's there with his bass clarinet and all his tenor. And I started reading about Courtney, and he was in there. He was talking about the BB Jazz Arts that he'd set up with his wife June Guichard, and I thought, this is for me, you know. And it was talking about for young black musicians, this and that, but I didn't think, oh, that's not for me. That's for me. So I wrote to Courtney, and I got this letter back, and it headed a BB Jazz Arts paper, and you know, it said, we have an admiration for someone so young that's could have named like all these players I was into. And, you know, they said they were clearly like into it. And I'm up there in Huddersfield. And I kept in touch with Courtney for a while. And then he played at Leeds. And I went to the gig. I went to speak to him afterwards. And Gary Crosby was in the band. It was Mark Mondesi, Adrian Reed on piano, Gary Crosby on bass, and Courtney. And Courtney spent a load of time with me afterwards. Just he told me about Booker Little and telling me to check out more Woody Shaw, which I was into. I'd never heard of Booker Little. Courtney told me about him and different things. He took me over to the piano. Then Gary Crosby seemed to click with me, and he spent like a load of time. So then, I mean, a few years went by, and then I ended up in London. I moved down to London to to play. I got into the Royal Academy of Music.
Can I just jump in, Sean? Because I know anyone's watching this outside the UK. Courtney Pine was a cultural phenomenon. He wasn't just an incredible saxophone player, one of the most gifted sax players I've ever seen, you know, but he was a cultural phenomenon. There was mainstream television, documentaries about him. He was played on the radio. He had like a record in the pop charts.
Yeah.
I can remember watching him on Wogan, which was the chat show, you know. So this guy was like, he was almost like the UK's Wynton Marsalis, wasn't he? He'd come in the 80s and brought jazz. That all of them now, Julian Joseph, you know, Gary Crosby, they're all had done an incredible thing, hadn't they?
Yeah, and then they had Andy Shepherd appeared and all this. And then at the time there was the Jazz Warriors that Courtney and some of his peers had started, and there was the Loose Tubes.
Yeah, I loved them both.
Yeah, but there was very much a kind of, I recall there being a feel of camps.
Yeah,
camps, and Jazz Warriors came along, and it was like, this is an all-black band. This is, you know, and there was, I think, an element of that was a commodity, an image thing that people like to latch on to. Then there were guys in the band who may have philosophically and politically had reason for it, and then there are others that just they wanted a gig, and there were all sorts of different things going on, I think, with that whole scene, that band. But when I moved to London, my aim was to play with the Warriors and to link up with Gary Crosby and get things happening. And I auditioned for the Royal Academy of Music, right? And I got in. It was Martin Speake, Jeff Klein, and Graham Collier. So we're talking 1990 from 91. And I got in. And at the time, I was really playing strong, right? I could play lead trumpet. I was starting to, I was really into jazz, but I could play lead trumpet. I had some lessons with Bobby Shue and things like that a lot of trumpet players have had, and it just life-changing, like really changing. And I was getting into really improvising, and I had this thing, I want to be a really heavy like jazz player. But between my audition and going down to college, there was quite a long gap of almost a year, I think. And I had to do my A levels and everything, but I got an unconditional. I got told it doesn't matter what grades you get, you're in. And during that time, there was some domestic issues that I was experiencing at home, and I ended up moving out, and I didn't have a trumpet for quite a while, right? So I didn't play, and I was also probably in a bit of emotionally, perhaps, and mentally in not a great way. So by the time I got to college, my chops weren't great. I was like, oh, my chops don't feel right.
It really affects, especially brass players, doesn't it? You know, it's like I cannot play and I got to warm my hands up, but all this just goes. I mean, I've known brass players. It's a hell of a thing, isn't it? It's quite a psychological thing, isn't it? Your mouth.
Very much. Well, yeah. I mean, there's the physical side of it, and there's psychological, and I think throughout the journey, you know, which is actually really the most important. But whatever happened, I just couldn't play, and I got to college. So I'm moving down. I'm 19. Moved down to London, into this Royal Academy of Music. There's all these really serious kids, you know, precocious young musicians around me. The environment as well, and I'm coming from a real, you know, working class background, and I'm in this place, and it just away from home, the whole thing, and it kind of fell apart for me, really. I just could not get into. I'd play in the big band, and I'd play like a chorus on a solo, and my face would be just dead. So I was really struggling with that, with playing. And Henry Lowther and Steve Waterman were my trumpet teachers at the time. They couldn't figure out what was you know, going on. And I went to see this guy John Wilbraham, great orchestral player, really struggling. And it distracted me from really dealing with the music, you know, the actual music side of it. And I ended up dropping out. I dropped out after my first year. But just before I did drop out, I'd met Wynton a few times, right? And I was massively into Wynton. Everything about him, he's you know, Hot House Flowers was the first album that I got, then Black Codes. I was into him, I was into his ideas, the way that he looked, everything was like, yeah, I'm into this, and the philosophy, and I was checking it out. And I was at Hackney Empire one night, and Courtney was playing. I went to see Courtney. And Wynton and Wycliffe Gordon, I think, and maybe Wes Anderson turned up, and they sat in. And any Courtney gig I ever went to, I'd always go and have a chat with Courtney afterwards and what have you, and hang out in the dressing room and that, you know. And he said, come and meet Winton. And I met Winton, and I went to speak to him, and I couldn't speak because my jaw all seized up. I was like absolutely in awe, really in awe of him, right? But then I met him a few times subsequently and spent a little bit of time, 5 minutes here backstage chatting, and he was really cool with me, right? And then I got this scholarship to go to a summer school that Gunter Schuller was running, and it replaced Tanglewood, which was like a big music summer school in America. Gunter Schuller was operating this thing at Sandpoint Festival called Schweitzer Institute, and I sent a tape, and I got in, and the Royal Academy said they'd pay for me to go over, and I went over, and Winton was one of the tutors, and it was for about a month. Winton, Joe Lovano, Victor Lewis, great drummer, Ed Schuller. And then the students, when I got there, were like, Seamus Blake was one of the students who was like phenomenal now, you know. Mercedes Rossi, the late Mercedes Rossi, a wonderful piano player. Loads of really heavy young players. I was completely out of my depth because I wasn't a heavy player, right? I had potential, but I wasn't. I'll tell you now that I wasn't in that kind of league. But they were all really cool. And we've talked about this thing about tradition. The American guys, they were really into everything. So they'd say, yeah, Arnett would do this. And they'd be able to tell you what Arnett could do. Or, you know, there's a trumpet player there, Brad Turner, he'd get a cornet out. He'd say, Louis Armstrong's fingers, this is how he did it. Then he'd play some Clark Terry articulation, he'd play Freddie. But then when he went to play, he'd do his own thing. But they understood it and they really respected it. Back home in England, it wasn't quite like that with that generation of players, my peers. And I didn't quite fit with some of what they were really into. But anyway, Winton was on this, and I'd met him a few times before. And he was just really cool with me. I got on really well with him, and I wasn't. It wasn't about I'm an amazing player, because I wasn't. But I think he just liked the way that I operated and my enthusiasm, and I was into the music and trying to play. And he was really cool with me. And he said, "Come over and study with my dad," and he put me in touch with Ellis. And Ellis wrote to me and said about me going over to New Orleans to study in the university there with him. And I was thinking about lining all of that up and going over there, but for various reasons that we might talk about at another point, it didn't happen. And that was one of these like really painful sort of regrets, that I wish I'd done that, and I wish I'd kept, you know, I could keep in touch with Winton. He'd phone me up when he came over. I could phone him at home. He was there, like, just, you know, and I wish I'd kept that going. But I drifted in and out of music, but I started playing with like people like Gregory Isaacs, Dennis Brown, all the great reggae artists. A musician called Ray.
Is this the point where you switched over to reggae as opposed to jazz? Was that a conscious decision?
No, it was just those were the gigs coming in, because I started playing with the Warriors. I started playing with the Jazz Warriors, and Ray Carlos was in the band, and Ray was like a bit of a real sort of uncle sort of figure on the scene. He was a real community guy into music. He was with Incognito at the time, and he'd done lots and lots of stuff, but he really liked to see young players come along. And he started calling me to do reggae gigs with him. And they were all artists that I'd grown up listening to, you know, Alton Ellis and all these people. And I ended up, you know, once you're in a little scene, you're in. And I was getting called to do Gregory Isaacs. I did records with Gregory, Sugar Minott, Juni Delgado, Mighty Diamonds, all of those guys. I was playing with them. And these are people that, in my record collection, I had them alongside with all the jazz stuff. So I was doing all of that. There was an amazing Latin scene in London at the time. Loads of Venezuelans and Colombians, a few Cubans. Jesus Alamani from Sierra Maestra came over, and he was in London for a while. And I got a chance to tour with Sierra Maestra, who were one of the great son bands from Havana, as a second trumpet, which was great. Next to Jesus, they came over, and I did this tour with them. Orlando Watusi, Tito Allen, you know, all these guys, Puerto Rican and Venezuelan guys coming over to London. And we were playing every week in some amazing bands. So I was doing all of that. And some pop thing, Manic Street Preachers I did. And later on, there's a British hip-hop scene. Ty did his first album, Terry Walker, Keziah Jones. That was a great band. So there's all these different guys that I was touring with outside of the jazz thing. But I was trying to get in. get into the music, into improvising and into playing. And I think because of these chop problems, and then subsequently, as we've talked previously, anxiety and depression, and I'd stop playing for a bit, I'd start again. This inconsistency, it just meant that I never really got to the level that I felt that I was capable of or aspired to.
But you did get to an incredible level. That's an incredible. Anybody watching this will go, "That's an incredible career." Your CV is unbelievable. You played alongside some of the finest jazz musicians that this country's produced in the last 30, 40 years. And then some of the great, hip hop, reggae, all this is incredible, absolutely mind blowing. Were you not proud of what you've done?
I don't do pride because I don't do pride. I'm really genuinely, I'm really grateful of it, right? And I think I must have been doing something right for them to keep calling me back. Yeah. I also know that,
without a doubt. Of course you were.
I had something, but it just never developed into what it should have done. And I don't mean to be, I could have been a contender. It's not that, because who knows? But people saw something. And Gary Crosby, he got me in his new troupe band, Jazz Jamaica All Stars. I recorded with them and toured with them. I mean, that was a great big band. Then I was in a generation of Tomorrow's Warriors. It was the second Tomorrow's Warriors.
That, yeah.
The first one was Julie Dexter and Jason Yard, which I got asked to join actually, and I wish I had, but I didn't. I said to him, I don't think I'm ready. But although I played on their album, but our generation was myself, Soweto Kinch, Eska Mutungwazi, Dave Akumu, Andrew McCormack, phenomenal. He's with Kyle Eastwood now touring. Tom Herbert, who's what's the Jimi Hendrix band with Pete Wareham and all. Lady, what's it called? They had a massive crossover success. Acoustic Ladyland.
Oh yes.
From that, yeah. And that was the generation I was in. So, and every Sunday we were playing, packing out the jazz cafe. Every Sunday we're doing these gigs. Then Soweto went off to do he's become big star. He's out there now with Nicholas Payton and all these guys in America. But that's who I was with. But every week I was going home after I'd finished playing, thinking, just don't play again. Don't play. I'm rubbish. I shouldn't be. I was really distressed by what I perceived as being, what am I doing here? I always saw myself as being the weakest link. But fast forward, after doing all of that and touring and doing some amazing stuff that I'm really grateful for, I went on a path that I think that you might recognize in terms of your insight as being what I recently heard referred to as a shadow path, a shadow career, right? Stephen Pressfield, an author, he wrote Legend of Bag of Ants, that I think Will Smith did the film, what have you. But he writes about writing. He writes about resistance for the artist, the resistance that comes up. That's grandiosity, lack of belief, the opposite, procrastination, self-doubt, this resistance that we get. And he says that the thing that you get it most strongly about, that indicates that's the thing you need to be doing. Now, I obviously had a lot of resistance, and I look back and I think the chops thing, resistance, going off and drinking and carry on in whatever else that was afflicted or I got myself into that distracted me from doing this thing I'm meant to be doing was resistance. And I can see that now. But in my shadow career, I got into education, which was something I did feel passionate about, teaching. I was always about bringing up other people into the music, introducing people to music. And I started working for Tomorrow's Warriors as their first education officer and developing a vision of their activities that I think a lot of what they're doing now today was rooted in the work that I did with Janine Irons and Gary Crosby in those days. And then I went on to found Jazz in the Round with Jez Nelson, which is an event that's still running now. And that whole idea I had was bringing all these different scenes, very cliquey is the jazz scene, or it was in those days, both along the lines of race, along the lines of age, style, just different social groups that people play in, they never cross and the audience didn't cross. And I was like, get them all together on the same night. The golf club jazz audience with the, Courtney's lot and this and that, they would get them all in the same building. And we did that. And lots of other things, working in various institutions. So that was kind of my shadow career. And I was serious about it. But really deep down inside, I needed to be playing, I needed to be being creative. And last week when we spoke, I went away and thought a lot about what you said about this thing of when you're not playing, you're not right. And I think that struggle that I had with my chops, that took me away from playing, and subsequently went on this roller coaster
So I don't know, but I would say that trouble with your chops was entirely psychological.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah,
Looking back now.
Yeah, it's to do with intention. It's the way I always describe it is that if you painted a 6-inch stripe along the floor and ask someone to walk along it, they'll walk along it because their movement center knows how to walk absolutely fine. But if they were walking along the top of 100-foot wall that was 6 inches wide, suddenly they would change how they approach it. And rather than just walking it, they would suddenly try and do it really slow and carefully. And I think when morality starts to kick in the form of, am I doing this right? Am I good enough? Am I deserving of this? Your movement center actually switches in and you become conscious. So you were probably thinking about your chops every time you blew. And, and once your movement centers are bypassed by your conscious moral sort of worldview, it's a different, it's anybody knows this. It's like when you try and throw something in the bin and you've got to try and not throw it in the bin for it to go in the bin. And what I really want to do with this talk is I haven't told this, but I got this mad idea of doing it in 3 parts, you see. And I'll tell you why. I don't want to tell you now because I've got this idea about music, and so I want to do this in 3 parts. And this first part has sort of set the scene really of you as a jazz musician, all really positive, but there's this underlying thing running through this. But you've done these incredible things, and on the next section, and if we can have a little break, do you want to carry on going today, Sean? Shall we just get it all done? Yeah, all right. So if we have a little break, I've got. You remember ourselves having my apple pie. I've got a little bit of the apple pie left to eat. So if we take a break and then we'll come back and then you discuss the sort of all this stuff that happened to you in regards of the issues you had with the jazz scene. And then the more recent issues. And then the final one, I'd like to just then try and tie it up and come to something that's positive, not just... I'd like to try and find a way through all of this, so we that people watch this and go, well, they're the solution there. Because I think your story is so fascinating to me. And I'm hoping, and you at home watching it, if you're watching it now, take a little bit of a break and come back. We're going to do this in 3 parts and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to finish up there and I'll just stop recording and we'll see you all in a bit for part 2 of the Sean Corby story. Hello, welcome to part 2 of my interview with Sean Corby. So, in the first bit, you had described your incredible career on the British jazz scene in the 90s. So we've just got to the point where, you're about to go off to with Jar Wobble to Bill Laswell's studio, and you were also talking about the fact you got into education and you were working with Tomorrow's Warriors. So do you want to take it up from there?
Yeah, so Tomorrow's Warriors and other organisations, arts organisations, Roundhouse, Trinity Laban Conservatoire, developed a good friendship there. And I wasn't working on the jazz department. I was in the community and outreach stuff. But I developed a good friendship with Simon Purcell, who was really is a great educator, jazz educator. And some other positions after that. I ended up at the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. So this kind of gets interesting here, because the National Youth Jazz Orchestra had a certain reputation. Bill Ashton founded it, I think, in the late 60s. And it really was like a gateway to the profession for many of the studio musicians, particularly horn players, but also a lot of really heavy rhythm section players, composers and arrangers. It was like the guys that end up in Abbey Road and Air Studios doing the film sessions, and on Parkinson and the big band and all of that. A lot of them would have come through Nigel. It was the place. And I think by the time you get to play with the band, you've got to be really heavy, particularly a very heavy reader. But certainly when you leave, you know, they're going to know that that's somebody that can, for a certain way of playing that's required in the business, as they say, they're going to get it. Now, a lot of people have come through it that are more renowned as being jazz players, and you know, Guy Barker, Gerard Pressenser, Nigel Hitchcock, you know, Chris Dagley, just loads and loads of players. Chris Hunter, I think. But he had this reputation, and it had a reputation for, if you go there, it could be people say elitist, but I mean, well, you know, it's a really, really heavy, musically heavy scenario that you're going into. So it is going to be like that. It's going to be intensely competitive. And if you were going to look to get into those studio kind of that world, it's like that. So that's just how.
Can you explain the difference between Tomorrow's Warriors, which is essentially another version of that, isn't it? Of Nijo.
Yeah.
What would be the difference between those two approaches?
So Tomorrow's Warriors comes from the Jazz Warriors,
yeah,
right? Certain way, not officially, but through lineage.
Yeah.
And the main factor in that is race. So Jazz Warriors was a black band, right? Tomorrow's Warriors, that Gary Crosby, that was a bass player in Jazz Warriors, founded, was to develop young black players, right? So then you have to ask, okay, so why was that required? Why do we need to have something for black players? Are they being prevented from accessing that, whatever it might be it Nijo, be it the scene? Or do black players just want to play with black players? And I think that it'd be very, very difficult to get an honest answer out of maybe any of the original pioneers of that Jazz Warriors scene, right? I think it'd be really hard, because I think there are people amongst them that simply don't want to play with white players, and they see jazz as being a black music, and that anybody else is a guest, and in fact at times maybe an unwelcome guest. And then there's some people, I think, amongst that scene that are just very confused over such issues. One hand, depends on who they're with. If they're with somebody in a dressing room in a certain environment, there'll be a Garveyite. In another turn of the face, there'll be something different, you know. So really here we're talking about this race thing. Now, as for the white players, I think that when I was at the academy, when we spoke earlier, I made it clear that I was playing with and knocking about and being around the scene and kind of aligned with the black British players. But also when we spoke about jazz, if somebody had said to me, what is it? I was the only one really there that talked about blues or the Afro-American tradition, all this. And when I used to speak about that in a class, it'd be a bit sort of, you know, because a lot of guys there that I knew that were my fellow students, they'd have a load of records. They wouldn't even have any black players in the record collection. You know, it was crazy.
And I feel that if somebody wanted to set up an organization looking at this sort of elitism that exists in jazz, especially an elitism that maybe shuts out young black musicians, possibly because culturally they're not going to be in the right place, you know, because I bet you Nijo probably cut out a lot of working class players as well, you know, that hadn't come up through a, you know, because I teach music and everybody, you know, your parents have got to have a certain amount of money to be able to afford the lessons, you know. So I think setting up an organization to welcome young black musicians into a music form which has had so many incredible black, you know, such incredible inputs, you know, from genius black musicians, you know, so that tradition is obviously so apparent, you know. It's you're gonna, if you start, you know, reading out the greats of jazz, you're going to go a long time before you start mention white musicians. I understand all this. You know, I'm trying to put the counter argument here, by the way, and I think that's really, really positive. And also, I'd like to state from my personal view, if somebody doesn't want to, for artistic reasons, wanted to have an all black band, there's no issue with that. I think creatively you should be able to do whatever you want to do, and if you know, especially if you're doing music that relates to that, it makes sense, you know. I think, you know, there is also a noble reason for doing that, and I don't think that in itself is racist. I'm saying this because as we go on, I do really want to explore this issue. But I think the positive parts of saying, yeah, you know, this kid's, you know, working class black kid, really talented, but he hasn't got access to all this and this and this and this because of racism, because all that. So, you know, that's my caveat at this point.
Yeah. And to be clear, you know, I played with the Warriors. I thought that the Warriors was for me. As I said earlier in part one, DB Jazz, Courtney Pine was talking about.
And you played with them, and you're a white musician, and you were welcomed into that group.
Yeah. But 30 odd years later, now I'm looking at things in a different way.
Yeah.
So I think that at certain periods of time, there are certain tactics that might be required to deal with things. Then it changes. You achieve a goal, you move on. So there's that. But I also think that there's a lot of erroneous thinking. There's a lot of fallacies around this Nigel Warriors whole thing and racism, etc. So even with the class thing, I think one of the things that is very different about the UK jazz scene in recent years that would have been in the 50s and the 60s, I think I'm not a gambling man, but I would put a bet that the vast majority of British jazz musicians, and I'm talking about Ronnie Scott and Tubby Hayes and all those guys, I would imagine that the majority of them were from working class backgrounds, right? A lot of the guys that ended up playing in the studios in London that were from around the country, quite a few home players came from Salvation Army, from brass bands. They came from like the Mecca dance halls, playing in the big bands and all of that. They were working class, and as we know, then culturally, and I think this relates to your "Why do all jazz players sound the same?" video, which I watched the other night. I think that one of the things that went, and I'll come back to the race and class thing in a minute. One of the things that seemed to go in my generation was nuance. You talked about sound. I think individual sound is something, but there's something about nuance, and I think that the fact that all the jazz musicians we talked about, that we identified as being, you know, the essential players, Monk, Louis Armstrong, Miles, all these people, they had access. The popular music that was around them that they were absorbing was songs, song forms and songs with lyrics and individual singers and different kind of nuance. They were absorbing different popular music, whereas now the music that's around is very different. So there's something about the nuance that's lacking. But the blues went, the swing thing went, and it all became much more focused on harmonic complexity and like you talked about metric modulation and different things. But I think that earlier generations of British jazz musicians were from a more working class background than they are now. And they didn't have the colleges. They weren't going to colleges. They weren't going to university. It was a different thing. And you were working, you know, you were out playing, gigging in a big band and doing a summer season and all of this. Now, when we look at the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, maybe its problem was calling it a jazz orchestra. Really, it should have been the National Youth Big Band or National Youth Studio Orchestra, because it did produce some players that were jazz players. But I think that some of this, well, you know, access for black players, etc., is more to do with what was required musically than any deliberate keeping you out. Right
now this is obviously an issue because you must have had some pushback you know, because you've got one foot in the Jazz Warriors camp, you've come from there, and now suddenly you've gone over to the other camp. So did you get some pushback?
Yeah, I got targeted. Yeah, yeah,
Targeted.
targeted. Yeah.
So can you
Uh,
describe what actually happened?
yeah. So when I started working for Nigel, they were going through like a big transformation. It'd been pointed out by the Arts Council, etc. For you to survive, you've got to change. This can't be like a little cottage industry anymore. It was Bill Ashton's baby, some of his chums and that, and he was, an amazing guy, right? Just some amazing for that band to have operated, and the players that have come through it. What an achievement! Amazing, right? But I think the Arts Council and others said, for you to survive, you've got to do this. And of course, diversity was a big thing. And with that, some people came in that weren't jazz musicians. They weren't necessarily from a musical background per se, but were very, very had lots of skills in business and the whole thing. And they started to turn it all around. And there was a lot of resistance from within the Nigel side of things. And there was some cynicism from outside. Now, I was in between jobs. I'd been doing a job at Trinity Laban. And Nigel had employed a chief exec, and they'd never had a professional staff before, but it hadn't worked out. So they needed somebody to come in and just like do the admin, do the getting the gigs, doing all sorts. And they called me, and it was like, "Yep, I'll come in and do it." So I started doing it. Now, wherever I go, whether it be in the Roundhouse, whether it was Trinity Laban, whatever role I've been doing within music and education, I'm always looking out for making sure that opportunities for those that you might overlook are there.
Because of your sort of background, sort of working class kid.
I am. Yeah. Working class, looking for black musicians, if that's the thing. Also making sure, again, this thing of bringing people together from different camps. So I'd be saying, right, look, check out such and such a guy. And if you want, get people on the board, get this, not tokenism, but getting people at every level of the organization from different backgrounds. That's what I'm about. Now, when I went to Nigel, the guys, I wasn't required to do that specifically my job description, but they knew where I was from and they knew who I knew and what I was about. So they'd ask me things. And
did this fit into the new sort of funding structure as well?
Yeah,
you've got a wider knowledge. You can pull from those areas. You're not. Well, you wouldn't be seen as an elitist because of your background. Because I think a lot of these issues actually come down to funding. I think people need to survive because of funding, and the funding has to push certain cultural buttons, and diversity and identity are the buttons that need to be pushed now. And so a lot of people will fall into certain camps because that's where the money is. And nobody wants to say that,
Well, I mean, I think that the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion industry is a gravy train, and I think that that's a whole different issue. And I think that a lot of the separatist stuff that goes on is at particular times there might have been arguably a need to make a certain position clear, but on others it harbours people that are bigoted. It harbours people that are actual separatists and certain kinds of sort of nationalist thinking in whatever camp you're in, as well as those who just think, oh yeah. I mean, certain organisations, I know they've said, all right, there's no money in as being a black organisation anymore. The future's in girls, so we'll get funding to get girls through. Next to be something else. Now, I don't have that kind of. There's a sincerity there with what I've always done that is not about ticking boxes, and I don't have to do it. I don't need to be making up.
The thing is what you're voicing is an opinion, and I think the way you're describing it is that opinion's coming from a good place, and I often think there could be people on both sides whose opinions are coming from a good place. But as you said, you got targeted. Can you be more specific about what that targeting was, what actually happened?
Yeah, so with the targeting, I was never a big man on Facebook, but I started getting Facebook. I think it must have been about 2010, 2011. And I've just started working at Nigel, and somebody started a Facebook page, and I forget the exact title of it, but it was something like when are there going to be more black musicians on the UK jazz stage? And it appeared that the most vocal character on this page, and I think you could see that it was an administrator, was somebody that was using a pseudonym, right? And it kind of became clear to a few of us that this pseudonym was either a particular person that we all knew or a number of people. So there were certain individuals on there that it started out that they were talking about there'd been some kind of altercation in Ronnie Scott's, right, where a certain British jazz musician, black jazz musician, had asked somebody to be quiet, and an argument had happened. Now, I don't know if this guy that he was arguing with abused him and used racial epithet. I don't know. And then there was another thing where I think Byron was playing and had invited friends, and the bouncers were rude to them in the queue. And the first thing that, when I was reading this, and they said it was down to racism, right, at Ronnie's. Now I'm like, anybody who's ever been to Ronnie's knows that the previous generation of guys on the door were great legendary characters. They were old school. They were bouncers, right? They weren't SIA badged up guys. They were bouncers, Monty and what have you, old school. And it wouldn't matter who you were, black, white, whatever. If you misbehaved, you'd be out, and you might even get a clip around the ear, right? Now, it's funny because I'd been at Ronnie's just a couple of weeks before I saw this thing that they were talking about. And I was there with a guy who lives in the Barbican, multimillionaire lawyer, Marxist, right? Big jazz fan, member, lovely guy. And he treated me to dinner and taking me to see, I can't remember who was playing, but...
Well, I'm glad he was spreading his wealth out there. It's a good Marxist.
Yeah.
You got a dinner out of it.
Yeah. Good guy, you know.
Yeah.
And I was in the queue with him. Now, this guy's a white guy in his 60s. We get to the front, bouncer, boom, hand on the chest, pushes him back. I'm a member, don't care. You know, really like out of order. And I mentioned this, I'm like, it's Ronnie's, man. You know, people are so bring the race thing into it, I don't know. Now, so that opened up the first like barrage that I got from people about whatever. I was like, come on, we're having a chat here about it. Let's have a look. And the next thing was that you could see loads of people piling into this Facebook group that I thought, you've probably never been to a jazz gig. And I asked some of them, what was the last jazz record you bought? What was the last jazz gig you went to? They were in there just from a pure race point of view, from a like, you know, all sorts of quasi pseudo black nationalists, this and that. They were all piling in this debate, and I'm like, but you're not even jazz fans. You're here for a different kind of argument. Then this thing came up about it spread, and quite a lot of people on the scene were coming in on this group, and there was this thing about why black people don't go to jazz gigs anymore. And it's like, man, if I hear people talking about this anymore, like, I just can't handle it. But I'm looking at it, and I'm just tired of it. Do you know what I mean? I'm tired of that, and I'm tired of like looking at being in certain company, and they're even talking about whether they think it's right or not for us to be in interracial relationships. I'm just tired of hearing these conversations, and it's coming from the same people all the time, the same mindset, and I'm just tired of it. And they said why black people don't go to see jazz, and one of them really started talking about, it's because it's so elitist, it's so expensive, they can't go. I'm like, listen, man, have you seen how much it is to go and see Movado, you know, Brixton Academy? You know, 3,000 people in there. They've all paid 35, 40, 50 quid. They'll all roll up in convertible bimmers, and they've got the nails done, and they've got, you know, £120 trainers on, this, that, the other. It's not the money, right? It's something else.
The jazz is now an elitist. It's elitist in a different way, and a whole bunch of people don't go and see it, you know, because it's just for, you know, we all know what that is. It's nothing to do with race.
People, black or white, they don't want to be listening to Train. You know, they want to watch EastEnders, they want to eat McDonald's or whatever, put their feet up after they've been at work, and, you know, listen to whatever it is that's current at the time, blah, 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 you know. The jazz thing is different now. It's got a different place in all of our culture. Yeah. So that was one of the things that started. But then it shifted, and they started having a go at certain people. Now, there was a combination of people that were named, you could see who they were, and it was like Trevor Watkis, there was Fayaz Verji on there, Cleveland Watkis, I think Offie was on there, loads of them, and loads of guys that I knew and that I'd played with and that I was friends with and all this, right? Then they started publicly, they had a pop at me working at Nigel, and there was reference made to me working for a racist organisation. They had a go at Courtney, they had a go at Dennis Baptiste for working for the Arts Council. I think they had a go at Soweto, and they also had a go at Gary Crosby for taking all the funding, they said, right? Now, so they started having a pop, and I fired back a bit. What most disturbed me, though, was that I thought, how can you be thinking that of me? You know me. So the fact that I'm at Nigel, you should have been thinking, nice one. If he's there, we're going to get some things happening. There'll be something happening.
Yeah,
but
I totally get that. And the thing is that you are doing the very decent thing in this interview.
Sorry, volume's gone.
Can you hear me?
No, volume's gone. Let's have a look.
You can't hear me anymore.
Yeah, the volume's gone completely. Here we go.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're back.
You go, yeah. And you're doing, and I know exactly why you're doing this, but your background, it's quite obvious that, you know, you've come from, you've been surrounded by loads of black people, black friends, relatives, you've been looked after by, you know, you have come from, you're not black, but you've been within the black culture yourself, haven't you? So they must have known that. They must have known that this guy is.
I think a lot of them, I mean, it's only because of this court case and other things that I've had to, like, diverge a lot of my, you know, personal laundry.
Which is rubbish, I don't, and it doesn't make any difference. But
yeah, I shouldn't have had to do that.
No, this is the one we need. So what I want to do now is so anyone's watched this video, I first heard of Sean. I didn't know he was a jazz musician. I first saw you on some news program because you've been involved in a court case, which has similar themes in it, doesn't it? There's a similar theme there going on. And I think you're quite a principled person, and you see these things as being bigoted and racist, and yet when you point them out, you're getting accused of almost being in the racist camp. So could you tell people watching about this court case and about that? So
just to finish on the Facebook thing, though, they did start sending personal messages.
Yeah.
Like, private, intimidating, threatening. You're a traitor. You're a snake. We're going to expose you. You know, all of this.
Yeah.
We're using pseudonyms. Okay. And I thought that was really cowardly. And it really, really did upset me for all the reasons that we're going to move on to, that who I am. Right. So this court case, it's still ongoing, so I'm going to be cautious about what I say, but it's in the public domain, it's been covered in the national media and it's out there, right? So where we're up to now, I can talk about. Recently, with the support of the Free Speech Union and a barrister called John Holbrook, who's working with me on a pro bono basis, and without support of that organisation and John, I would have been.
So this is an issue with your current employer, isn't it?
My current employer, yeah.
So which is ACAS, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so how did you get to working at ACAS? Because obviously this is all the experience you've built up working in all these different community arts things and working with, you know, in that area. I suppose that gave you a CV and you end up. So what were you doing at ACAS? What's your job?
So at the moment, I've been there since 2018. I've done a few different jobs there. But at the moment, I work as a conciliator. So ACAS's role, if you don't know, it's a government department, what you'd call a quango. Its main role is to advise on workplace policy and practice, and to arbitrate, sometimes collectively. It's not a union, it's impartial. My role is as a conciliator, and I work in a team that deals with pay disputes, so for individuals. So if an employee has a problem with an employer not paying the wages or the holiday pay or whatever it is, and they need to take it to an employment tribunal, to court, the legal obligation is to go through us first, and we try to see if we can settle it.
Right? Yeah, before you get to that point. Yeah,
that's my role. So I've been there since 2018, and I'm doing this role now. They also have a training team that goes out and delivers presentations and training in different aspects of employment law and workplace practice. And I got a temporary promotion for a year doing that. And I did notice I started to have some issues with some of the materials that were related to identity politics, because it seemed to me that it wasn't impartial and they were going beyond teaching law as pertains to the workplace, and were actually wittingly or otherwise presenting ideology or things that were contentious as fact. So I started to have a bit of a problem. The other thing was that lockdown. So during lockdown, we're all at home, working at home, and every day I started to see bulletins, all staff bulletins, and stuff on the intranet, which is the internal internet, relating to identity politics again. For the most part, it was LGBTQ stuff. But then in 2020, following the Black Lives Matter moment, let's say, it suddenly switched to race. And there were lots of bulletins proclaiming support for Black Lives Matter, organization. On the intranet, in various groups, there was like a diversity group, etc. There was stuff like reading lists being sent out, and all of it was very much influenced by Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. Okay, and it was coming from a position where they were like things like white fragility, Robin DeAngelis, and all this kind of stuff, coming from all of that, right? White people have this like original sin of racism. Black people are victims. That's the basic position, and we must atone for this, for our sins. And for a start, I mean, I didn't go to work for that anyway. I want to do my job, right? Yeah. I don't want all that stuff. But then they announced that they had this race network where people that work at ACAS could join this race network. And there are networks across the civil service: women's network, race network, faith network, all these things. And the function of it, I think, was to help advise the upper echelons of the organisation about internal and what they do outside in relation to race, etc. Then one day there was an announcement from a colleague sent to all staff that they were going to start a new race network, which would be for Black members of staff only, right? And I commented on this. I asked for a rationale. What was the rationale? What's the reasoning behind that? So we're an integrated organisation. We have a race network that's made up of, for anybody that wants to join it, to engage in dialogue about race issues and to feed that up. There's a head of diversity and inclusion who's a woman, white woman. She's the head of it all, right? So what is the rationale behind saying we're going to have a Black only group? And then they said one for allies. And this allyship thing, which I think is ludicrous as well, right? And I questioned it. I said, what's all that about? What do you need that for? What is your rationale? What's your thinking behind it? And I also commented, I said, like, I wouldn't want to be part of a group that said my son or my wife can't be a member of because of their ethnicity, colour of the skin, and, you know, vice versa. Can you explain? And
just to make it clear, your wife's Black, isn't she?
Wife's Black, yeah. I've got two sons. Not with my wife, but they're both mixed race as well. My sons, their mum's Black. Now, I was like, how Black do you have to be to join one group, and how un-Black do you have to be to join the other? you know, would Ramar Bearden, which if Ramar Bearden turned up, which would you allow him in, or would you have to do like a hair test like they did in South Africa, you know, about identity? How are you going to work it? And apparently she was
So basically, you were heretically questioning this ideology.
yeah,
That's
separatist.
basically what you started to do, just questioning it. You weren't like going, I'm against this. You were just questioning it.
Well, I am against it, but I was asking like, what's your
Yeah.
rationale thinking? And I mentioned it. I mentioned the word segregation that they didn't like. But what else do you want? What do you call it? What's if you don't want to call it segregation? What is it? It's separating people on the basis of race. That's separatism and segregation, right? Anyway, apparently she was so alarmed by my comment that she had to go home. You know, this unsafe thing.
Yeah.
So I got a phone call. This head of the race network had a discussion with me and was actually went away, commented on how insightful the conversation had been, and was very complimentary about my viewpoints, my experiences, blah 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 blah. Right. The other thing that I'd done was send certain information to the chief executive of ACAS, Susan Clues, and the race network managerial lot. I'd sent them various, like for example, a link to Theory of Enchantment. There's a woman called Chloe Valdari who has she's American, does diversity training over there, but completely different from.
Yeah, I know who she is. Brilliant stuff. Yeah,
based in Martin Luther King's teachings.
Yeah,
that's how it is. Beautiful, brilliant stuff. Yeah, sent them that. You know, just ignored really. Sent some other things about, generally speaking, saying, look, there's another way of looking at this. I'm not saying don't give us the Black Lives Matter critical race theory stuff. Say what you want. That's you're free to share your perspective. Come on here and, you know, recommend the philosophies of Marcus Garvey if you want. Send us, you know, a link to tell us what you think about Louis Farrakhan. That's fine. But there's other ways of looking at it, and we need to be able to share those. And it led to me making some posts in the area of the intranet where we are invited to do so. And I'm looking and was getting all this stuff all the time, you know, book lists and this and that and clenched fist and all of it. Cool, that's fine. So I put up some posts. I put a link to a biography of Howard Thurman, mystic, theologian, mentor to Martin Luther King. His lineage as well, very interesting. Olive Schreiner, that he was influenced by his meetings with Mahatma Gandhi. Non-violence as a way of life, not just a tactic. Very difficult to adhere to. All of this stuff. So let's have a look at this. And then I sent some articles by various. Happened actually, just coincidentally, 3 women of Nigerian descent. An article by Inaya Falarin Iman, who interviewed me for the Equiana project.
Yeah.
Aisha Akambi. And it was about truth and belonging sometimes being incompatible. And they didn't. I had a picture of her and a quote and talked about her and said how she articulates so much of what I think and believe better than I can. And then there was a link to something that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wrote and some other stuff. There was a link from the BBC, which, as I say, is not really a bastion of the far right. That was an article about white working class boys not doing very well at school. And I said that I was glad to see this being recognised. I hope we could do something about it, because if they're not doing well at school, it might be that they're also not doing well at work. And ACAS might be interested in that because, yeah. And all of a sudden, one day I came into work and I was told to take all these posts down. And ultimately was told that there was a complaint had been put in against me by 4 members of staff in London that never met me. I'm in Leeds. So for the viewers that are in perhaps around the world, 250 miles away, they never met me. They didn't know anything about me apart from my profile picture, which is just like this, my mush, my face. And they put this complaint in. And then I would argue, which we will do in April when we go back to court, that it was completely mishandled, etc., etc. It went forward to a formal grievance, which means that the very most senior people in that organisation saw their witness statement and their complaint, took it seriously, which, yeah, you do, but investigated it and decided to proceed with a grievance against me, which ultimately wasn't upheld, but still I had to go through all of that process. And to this day, I'm not allowed to put these posts back up. Now, the most disturbing thing really is that the complainants put together this statement, and when I read it, I was shown part of it. I wasn't shown all of it. And when we asked to see all of it, firstly, we were told you can't because it's part of a formal grievance. But then later on, we were told that they thought it might be detrimental to my mental health. My employer knows that I suffer from anxiety and depression. They make reasonable adjustments at work for me. During this time, my legal representative, my line manager, was really worried about my well-being. I was in a pretty bad way. And bearing in mind, this came out in court, that when I was 22, 23, I took an overdose. I tried to kill myself then. I haven't done that.
The fallout of this is incredible. We're coming up to the last minute, so shall we? We'll jump out here. So you've set the seed. Anybody who's watching this through, you set the seed of why you got. This is a, an incredible effect on you personally. So, but anyway, we'll finish up there, and then in part 3, you can tell us about what's happened here, and we can have a chat about our opinion on it and see where we get. So. Thanks for that, Sean. Let's finish up. We'll have another 10-minute break. Is that all right? You collect your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
See you in a bit, matey.
Bye. See you. Bye.
So, part 3 of my interview, Sean Corby. So, in part 2, we just got to this point where you described sort of 2 issues with where you'd hit problems with identity, race. One in the sort of UK jazz scene, and then more recently in your workplace at ACAS, where a grievance was taken out against you for putting up, what to most, I think, I won't say this. Oh, I will say it because I was going to say it. To most sort of common sense people that, posting a Martin Luther King, reference, you would not see that as being a racist thing to do. But if you follow modern identity politics, critical race theory, a white person posting a Martin Luther King speech is seen as racist, isn't it? And so you hit all this sort of stuff. You got a grievance against you, and this has affected you quite deeply. And you were just saying about before we got rudely cut off by the Zoom, that you actually ended up taking an overdose. Is that right?
No, the overdose when I was younger, like when I was like 23 or whatever.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. What I was saying is that there's a vulnerability there.
Yeah,
and the employer was aware of that.
Yeah. And they have a duty of care to you, which ACAS know this more than anybody. There's a duty of care to you psychologically to make sure you're okay.
Yeah. And it'll be argued we returned to court in April. We won a decision, a groundbreaking decision recently that my beliefs on race were protected under the Equality Act as a philosophical belief. They tried to argue that I wasn't discriminated against and harassed because I was just expressing opinions. Hence, there was a very, very intense cross-examination that I underwent in court not so long back, and I had to undergo what they call the Granger test, where it's a very stringent legal test. There are 5 elements to it, and you have to undergo that in order to ascertain whether or not your beliefs warrant protection as a philosophical belief. So hence a lot of my laundry came out as in my past, because there's context about my motivations behind posting, why they're not just willy-nilly beliefs, like as if I was talking about football or something like that. Why so it was all of that. But just to backtrack, the statement that they wrote about me, why it's so disturbing really, was that they demanded that these posts be taken down immediately. There was no attempt to engage with me in terms of intellectually, even if they wanted to just put me right. So, Sean, you're talking rubbish here, boom, not that. Take them down, and I quote, he's a racist, probably a far-right activist that's infiltrated the workplace with, quote, a deep-rooted hatred for black people. He's a danger to any BAME colleagues that he works with. And it came out in court that when they put this unhinged, incoherent statement together, they actually asked for bodyguards.
And these are people who never met you.
Never met me, knew nothing about me. Like, just one of them, they put in an anonymity order to the court so that the names would never appear in any public domain. And they put that in the grounds that they said that they were unsafe from me and from my far right sympathizers, apparently, you know. And the court thankfully just chucked that out as being ludicrous, which it is.
Now, the people who brought, how many people brought this against you?
Oh,
so it's 4 people have sort of, and they've coordinated this somehow, haven't they? 4 people have coordinated this. And any of them, can you mention any of them or not?
I can, but I won't. But what I will say is one of them, I mean, the anonymity order, when I see through that, it's about them not wanting accountability.
Yeah,
they can do this, and
they want to be able to destroy you and that, and accuse you of things that, like you being far right, and I don't even have to justify what the reasons are, because they're not going to bring anything to themselves in terms of an argument or background or context of why they think that. They're just going to say that you're accused of that. You know, he's a heretic. Take him out.
Totally. And of course, then the senior leadership above them.
Watch your arm, men.
Oh yeah. Oh, please. That was my John.
You know, they'll do.
Yeah, they'll let it that bit.
Oh, I've got a wicked sense of humour, Sean. It's terrible. I can't.
No, I get it. Yeah. The senior leadership that enabled it as well. I mean, you know, you can just see it. They're all there. They've just been reading Robin DeAngelis, you know. Right, we've got one. Off with his head, you know. Because that's very much what happens, this collusion between them all, and you know, and that'll be argued in court. But one of the complainants is a very prolific, I'd say ethnocentric activist, who only a few months ago appeared on the front page of the Morning Star, which is a Communist Party newspaper, you know, brandishing her particular views on race politics. And she talked about rooting people out in the workplace and all of this, you know. And she's got an organisation with Lee Jasper about black people in the arts and what have you. Says she's a human rights activist, says she's an artist and all this. You know, she's clearly got a race fixation in my view. And, you know, I think they thought, well, we've got one here. We'll get him. Would have destroyed me. You know, put my head on a pike and said, we got a racist, you know, had me out in the...
But more importantly, they then completely control the narrative, don't they? Because now, rather than I don't really have a problem with critical race theory. I don't have a problem with identity politics at all. I actually think that in every single philosophical point of view, there is always a grain of truth. But you can never assume that any philosophical sort of viewpoint, even the ones that I uphold, I would never want to be in a position where I said, "Now this is dogmatically true." Right, it can't be questioned. You can't question my view of the world, because that is just a terrible place to end up in. And yet these people they're not just, it's not just happening because the ideology is there. There is a political movement to try and control that so it cannot be questioned. To me, it's entirely totalitarian and authoritarian. And that I find this quite upsetting, to be honest, and frightening. I think you have done an incredible thing in standing up to this at great personal risk to your own self. It's psychologically. You could have just shut up, couldn't you, and said, "I'm really sorry." But you stood up against it. You've taken this to court. And anyone watching this, if you go and Google Sean Corby, you will see this is a landmark case. It's an incredible, you know, thing that you've achieved, that now, if you don't agree with the philosophy of critical race theory, identity politics, intersectionality, then uh, that viewpoint is now protected. You could have that viewpoint in law. Now, the thing is, I'm very aware that anyone watching this is that this is a bit long chat. It's had a lot to do with the British jazz scene and your work in that, and I want to bring it back to that. So, in your experience, what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is how you think, you have worked in the jazz scene. I haven't worked in the jazz scene. I've worked, but I as you know, I love jazz, and I grew up with jazz. So, but we are sort of white British. We're neither American or black, and so you do go up against this thing. And there's this movement in America now. They don't like the term jazz, and I understand why they don't like the term jazz, because it did start off as a sort of, corporate white commercialization of a music form. And the reason why I can see why people don't like the word jazz, it is absolutely limiting. And I know from working in the industry, I was once told, this by Robert Plant when I was playing with him, that jazz, in terms of a marketing tool, is terrible. So there's so many, it's like Snarky Puppy, they don't want to be called jazz. These sort of artists that don't want to get labeled as jazz because it actually makes it less commercial. So I really understand that, and it wasn't the name of that music. It's been foisted on them. But this movement, it's like, is it Nicholas Payton? To call it Black American music. And I've hit this on my channel because I don't quite get this at all. It's like I don't quite understand how this works in terms of, for so many different reasons. It's like, I'm not. So if you take like jazz history, what's Django Reinhardt playing? Is he playing Black American music? Because that seems counterintuitive to say that what Django was playing was Black American music. Or say what Bix Beiderbecke's playing, or Keith Jarrett, or Anthony Braxton.
Yeah.
I was listening to Anthony Braxton the other day, and I thought, this is very intellectual, almost like modern classical music that has got an improvisatory element.
Yeah.
I can't hear Black American music in it. I hear something else, and yet before I would have said, yeah, Anthony Braxton's a jazz artist because that was the name of all that type of stuff. So what's your opinions on this?
Again, this is something that I think over the years has changed and developed. I think, first of all, what I'd say is that to call jazz, to use a racialized term to describe music, I'm not with that anymore.
No.
In fact, when we talk about black music or black culture, I don't think that exists. When you talk about black community, I don't think black community exists. If anything, it'd be plural, so there'd be black musics, black cultures, and we only have to see, if we talk about culture's not just the arts, is it? It's language, it's faith, it's food, it's where people live, it's the way, all sorts. I mean, this is part of the issue that I've got, is that somebody with the same ethnic background as you, somebody born in the same geographic location as you, somebody with the same skin color, may or may not have anything to do with you, in common with you, right?
And it's a beautiful thing that we've all got our own opinions, our own experiences. And I always thought that if you decide to give any sort of racial group, when you say black people are all this, or white people are all this, right? That can't be logically the case. It's not a matter of racism. That just cannot be true. There's very few statements you can make where they will apply to everybody in that identity group, especially in terms of race, which is actually really fluid, isn't it? We're all. I'm, my mom's Indian, so I'm not completely white. My upbringing's white. Culturally, I'm white. But I got people in my family that are culturally Indian, and I think that's my take on it. I see race as being so it's really hard to box it off and say, you know, and I understand from people's own lived experience, they might see that they're going to see themselves as a black person, but to try and come up with any idea or attribute that will apply to all those people, and this is where it is racism, and then to make an assumption about an individual based upon their race on that, it's just illogical to me. It doesn't make sense. People are going to do it because human beings are quite shallow, and we go in our little tribes, don't we? And we're in our and I understand all that. Now, one of the things I wanted to throw into this is, last night I was watching an interview with Coleman Hughes, and he was talking about, because you've seen how he's had a similar thing happen with his TED talk. He wasn't allowed to do TED talk because he was saying the same point of view is the way to deal with this is with colorblindness, you know. And TED didn't want to put it up, and then he had to have a conversation with somebody called Jamal something who was from, and he did a really good opposition argument. It was a good, healthy debate, you know. And the other guy that was for not approaching racism with color, you know, actually dealing with identity, he had a strong argument. Anyway, I was watching that last night, and one of the things that I came the conclusion I came to is there's a fundamental difference here. And what it is it's the argument that black people have had an experience unique to them, which has to be dealt with. So in America, that's the history of slavery. This history of slavery has identified that group as having special needs in terms of how you deal with the racism of that group, right? And so what they're trying to do is saying we do have to have affirmative action with that group, because that group has got a very specific history that it's approached. Now, I was listening to this and I thought there's a real problem here, because we've imported this into the UK, and in the UK, black people in the UK have got a completely different experience. And I'm not saying it's better, and I'm not saying there hasn't been racism, but it's different, right? And one of the big problems that you could see when they were arguing in America with like critical race theory is they're saying black, but in America, you know, the non sort of ex-slave, you know, Afro-American contingent, you know, the immigrants that have come in from Africa and also from the West Indies, but coming recently, they're doing brilliantly in America. And so to me, I thought this is not about race. Even if you take that point of view, this is not about race. It's about certain groups that have certain needs. And if someone was saying we need to deal in America with the issue of slavery, I'd probably go, yeah, you do. There's an issue there. Now, then the next thing that came in was once you've identified that that's an issue, once you've identified that black people have issues that are specific to them, so it's not the same as like hair color or looks, you know, it's a different type of attribute that you're having to deal with. I can't see then how the way to deal with that is through a colorblind Martin Luther King, judge them by the context of their character. Even at that point, this is the thing I don't understand. And so coming back to this Black American music, I cannot see the utility of dividing it in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's a pretty, you know, because when you're if you're saying Black Americans, that in itself is not specific enough to describe what it's trying to describe. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So if a musician in America comes in from, say, Africa, and they've moved in, they go to jazz college there and they learn, are they part of that group just because they colour their skin?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
What about British black musicians? Are they part of it?
Yeah. So there was a lot there.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like tactics for dealing with things, and so at the minute I'm wanting to read like Touré Reed, check out Adolph Reed, people like this, so Black American thinkers who are on the left and they're talking about class, etc. Right? So there's all these different perspectives on it. But when we get back to fundamental, when we talk about them, race being something that is contextual, right? One of the people the woman that was the accuser of me in this case, very, what they say, light skin, straight hair, wears loads of African gear to make up for it. Yeah. If she went to Benin and said to them she was black, they'd laugh at her. Right? They wouldn't see her as being black. That's something that is contextual. As we know, so Romar Bearden that talked about earlier, fascinating. You know, he's somebody that I understand could have what they call passed, so passed for white, but he didn't. And I think he made a conscious decision not to, from the little that I've read about that aspect of him. Yet he would be classed as black. So there's all this stuff like we know in South Africa and in America, I think the southern states, one drop and all this kind of thing. I mean, it's perverse.
It's just, yeah, this is my point. It doesn't, these classifications for me do not specifically identify the issues they're trying to identify.
Yeah.
You know, it's somebody who is a descendant of a slave in America who has grown up in areas where there's poverty because of the history of America. That's a very specific person to say someone living in, say, France who's a multi-millionaire black.
Yeah.
Where's the utility? Before we get into this color blindness thing, where's the utility in actually dividing people up? And what I find really interesting in your case is, if we take the sort of Black American music thing, where do all these guys sit in the UK?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, what I found in the jazz thing is in the British jazz scene seems to just be dripping with an inferiority because they're not American jazz musicians. It's like, like every great British jazz musician has to be compared with an American guy. And so often they'll market them by going, oh, they've gone to America, you know, when they've really made it. You know, Courtney Pine really makes it. I can remember when I first saw him, he was with the incredible quintet that you described. It was unbelievable, with Mark Mondesir on drums. And then later on, they brought him in, did a really big gig, and he was playing with Dennis Chambers on drums. He's got this American band. And Courtney's good enough to play with the American. So there's an inferiority there. And I think there's an inferiority with white jazz musicians, especially white British jazz musicians, that's, you know, you're doubly ostracized. I know everyone's going to hate me for saying this, you know, but it's like I've felt that all my life. It's probably me doing it to myself, but you know, I'm a sort of a white kid from, you know, Kidderminster in England. It's like, how can I play jazz? I love it, but you know, it's not the same as being, you know, grown up in New York and going, you know, I felt out of that. And I was watching I critiqued it actually. Adam Neely was really making the point that if you've got to respect these New York jazz musicians that are living the life, that's the real deal. All this stuff seems garbage to me, you know, in terms of jazz.
I don't think I've fully absolutely arrived at a position where I've organized all my thinking on this.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of things. So firstly, back to the jazz black music thing. As we know, I think it was either Winton or Doug Womble, who at one point I either read or heard them speaking. They were talking about the common well of the South, right, that people drew from. So, and this whole idea of Albert Murray spoke about with the omni-Americans. He says so-called black and so-called white, and that in every kind of possible way, we're actually a lot more like composite than what we might think.
I find this a beautiful thing about jazz, because jazz is a music form, has been incredible at reaching out, you know. I mean, it's like the French understood that jazz was an art form in the late 20s, 1930s, and they set up the Hot Club of France. You know, that was a club for people that were going, this is, and so Django Reinhardt, and Stefan Grappelli, they grow out of a tradition of somebody in a completely different, you know, country hearing this music going, oh my God, this is incredible. And that's what jazz did to me. That's what jazz did to you. There's something incredible open arm and inclusive about jazz. And then you go back to look at the history of jazz, and I'm having arguments with people and they won't accept it. But the whole thing about New Orleans, it wasn't a group of black people. New Orleans happened to be integrated. It was just more integrated. White people, Creole people, black people, Native American people, Italian American, Irish, a whole, people from Latin America. There's all these influences there, and jazz is the product of that integration. And I think what was incredible, because of that integration, that openness and that inclusivity, it's in the music. And so genius black musicians were able to go, right, I can actually express myself in this. And then you get your Buddy Bolden, you get King Oliver, Freddie Keppard, then Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton. And these are geniuses. But that music form that they were working in is brilliant because it was integrated. It was integrated at a time in America where nobody else was integrated. Surely in this sort of, in a world where we want to counter racism, surely that's the bit of jazz we should be championing, not turn around and go, yeah, but it's black music.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it.
Yeah, and I can hear as we discuss it all the kind of counter arguments about it, but it's no surprise that it came from a port city to start with, right? Buenos Aires, Havana, New Orleans, Marseille, Naples, Liverpool, these places where all this stuff and something unique's come out over generations. So that in itself tells you this music is not racially pure. Why would you want it to be? How can
this is it. It's not a racially pure. That's the beauty of it.
All sorts of stuff, as you spoke the other day, we talked about Jelly Roll Morton. Like when I was saying about Jamaican music with Mento, with quadrille, with all this stuff, with the mocking, imitation in terms of stance and dress and dance of the Europeans that they saw, as well as interaction between the two and a sharing of everything in their lives, But we know that there's also this other stuff that's gone on about segregating people deliberately. But jazz itself, I see that as being something that's an integrated music. Later on, might have been political movements, such when you get to the 60s and Max Roach is making Freedom Now sweet and all of this stuff that's going on. Yeah, we're going to say that the music is about that. And Frank Kofsky,
and that's brilliant because jazz is able to do that. Jazz is a music form where you can make statements like that. Charlie Mingus, with that song, about that governor in the South and Max Roach. People think the positive thing of being able to do that with jazz, you can make very intellectual, rarefied music like Anthony Braxton, which operates almost like a classical music, and you can play dirty, rotten blues like Louis Jordan, and you can make political statements like Max Roach. You could do all these things in jazz because it's an incredible music form, and I think that it's the nature of jazz that enabled black Americans to express themselves at such a high level. That's what I think actually happened, rather than it being the other way around. The blues is a African American form. Totally, that was created. But if you look at the history of the development of jazz, right, you could see, I've really researched into this. You've got quotes from Jelly Roll Morton where Jelly Roll's saying pre-1900, around about that period, if you wanted to play in a jazz group, they were black musicians pretending to be Native American because the Native American influence was so profound. Someone like Cindy Bechet that swore blind that jazz was French, and the reason for that was because Bechet was taught a specific technique from a guy called Lorenzo Tio. He was taught by Mexican musicians that technique. You got Papa Jack Lane with that integrated band of white and black that ends up with the original Dixieland Jazz Group, and you got Louis Armstrong saying that, when the original Dixieland Jazz Band came out, it was groundbreaking. It was he had a lot of respect for what they were doing, because I think if you went back then, their viewpoint of what was going on was entirely different, because we're seeing it through the lens of identity politics now. Right, we're seeing it through that lens. And so one of the big discrepancies is that I really believe that the Creole musicians saw themselves as being above black. That was the hierarchy, and they were proud to be Creole. And so many of those jazz groups were Creole, and the reason is because the Creole influence had that Spanish influence, it's got French influence, it's got a whole bunch of different influences. If you go back to like ragtime, even going back to 1860, 1870, there's a strong Sicilian influence there, and this crops up over and over again. But talking to people now, it's as though they've been brainwashed by this view out there of jazz being an exclusively black music form, which other people have come in and played a part of, but they've been outside it playing their little part, and probably, culturally appropriating what the black musicians have created. And this is not true.
Yeah.
It's simply not true. Now,
Yeah.
you know Winton pretty well. What do you think he's appointed? Because I've singled him out quite a lot of being the sort of, poster boy of this sort of conservative black music. But
first of all,
to him talk more recently, he doesn't seem to be. That's not his. He continually calls it American music.
Yeah, I was in touch with him for a while. I'm not in touch with him now.
Yeah, no, I know that. Yeah.
But for a while, I was, been able to correspond with him and call him and speak, and he called me for a short period of time a few years ago. But throughout all of it, I've watched him close and listened to him closely, his music and who he is, and I think he's been on an incredible journey himself of learning about humanity and all of these kind of issues. And he was 19, 20 when he made his first record, and he look back now and he says some of his playing, some of the things that he said, but we've all hopefully
we all do. That's part of the beauty of it, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, I think that I still have a kind of a reverence for the fact that this music came from America. It came out of the meeting of all these different people: European, African, Native American, etc. The Cuban, the Caribbean influence. New Orleans is like a Caribbean city, really, more than an American city from what I've seen of it in terms of its culture. And this music's come out, then it's been urbanized and it's gone out, and then, like you talk about, the recording, it's all changed it, and it's gone global. I still have a reverence for where it came from.
I do as well. And I really believe that the real geniuses of this music, especially early on, are black American musicians, without a doubt. And it's astounding. And I don't want to limit the perception of those musicians by calling them black, because that's how I was brought up. My dad. My dad would point to certain musicians like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, Oscar Peterson, and he was saying, these are the best. This is the best. And as a kid, I would look at these covers and go, oh my God, that's like the best musician. And I'd listen. My dad would explain what was going on. And when I realized that they were making it up on the spot, not working it all out and writing it down, making this up on the spot. And my dad was explaining how jazz works. And, he used to say, sing the melody while they're soloing, and you can hear then all this stuff at a very young age. So I just thought these people are utter geniuses, that the highest that humanity can produce.
I think you're right that it's reductive to talk about.
It's reductive. That's exactly what I feel in all of this.
Leon Forrest the other day, the author, he was the last non-Muslim editor of Muhammad Speaks, which was the Nation of Islam newspaper back in Chicago, back in the 60s, I think, right?
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Divine Days. It's like his magnus opus. I've only read bits and pieces of it, but with an interview with him that I sent to you, he talks about he wanted to write the great American novel, not the great black American novel, the great American novel, and he was checking out Dostoevsky and as well as Ellison and all these different, and Shakespeare, all these different writers, these different people. And I think that is the genius of your Armstrong, your Ellington, Train, Winton, Miles. There's this openness of what they were taking in and humanity and what arts and culture really means. And that genius, it's come from those people of African descent in America, but with their experience that's unique to America and that history. And Albert Murray, when he talks, it's not African music. Nobody in Africa played jazz like.
No, I mean we're both musicians. I think this is another
drummers that have come out of
it's like I can go through actually what jazz is and think, what is the instrumentation? Well, that's come from sort of marching bands, Western classical music. What about the technique? But it's sort of classical technique, and we know the history of what that is. What about the harmonic structures? Everything that everyone gets bogged down. The fact that you can play a 7#9 and play the seventh mode of the melodic minor. That's like romantic classical music. The blues, that's African American influence. Without swing, the swing's coming from marching bands. It's coming from a whole host of different places, including you know, a dim memory of Congo Square in those musicians. It would have been a dim memory. And so, yeah, there's obviously African elements in it, but not even 50%.
Yeah.
You know, and I actually think it belittles the jazz musicians, because I can remember when I first heard Jelly Roll Morton, I thought it would be not sophisticated, and he's like an incredible virtuoso musician playing incredible stuff. It's not just the blues, it's not just pentatonic, you know, it's not that, it's everything, and it diminishes the achievements of these musicians to hem this in. But of course, this whole ideology is diminishing, isn't it? In the end.
Reductive and diminishing, as you say, and it denies something that's, without not being all, you know, oh, let's all have a cuddle, but something really deeply beautiful about.
Yeah, that's it. It's the beauty of it, and I find myself frightened to state what I think, but I feel I have to, and this is why I want to do this interview. We're to the last 5 minutes now, so I'd like to wrap up with you, Sean.
All right.
And thank you for doing this. You know, this is going to be I think it's going to be the longest video I've ever put up on my site, you know. But yeah, I hope anyone watching this will realize that what we've got very similar opinions on this. I don't agree with critical race theory, and it's not because I'm a racist. It's because it's the absolute opposite. Yeah, but I just don't agree with it. If somebody can come with a rational argument for why it works, but when I see these, I've studied it for 30 years. This philosophy, really have, doesn't make sense to me. Sorry, doesn't make sense. And I've, you know, we've tried here to explain a little bit, and I'm sure I'll come back to it. Does not make sense, right? And I feel that I should have a right to be able to go, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And what about this? And not get shouted down and accused of being a bigot for saying it. And so I must thank you for standing up in court and representing, you know, normal common sense people, because most people think like this. And I think a lot of liberal people who, you know, champion Black Lives Matter and critical race, it's because they think it is,
they still,
you know, it's a tonic against racism, but I don't believe it is.
No,
I don't. And I hope anyone's watching this video will see that, you know, you're not a bigot. I'm not a bigot. We love black music. We love, you know, and there's loads of music. But I actually think that rock and roll's black music, and our popular music's black music. I think that is because it's come out of the blues. It's come out of that, you know, and the church in America. That's where that's come out of, but not jazz. Something else. Anyway, Sean, I took over then at the end of this, didn't I? I've had a bit of a rant.
You saved me. You helped me out. No, I mean, again, thank you so much. There's so much more that we could go into. It's a learning thing.
You know,
all the time and open mind.
We're good mates now, aren't we? We've chatted quite a bit now, and I think you and me have just like gone like this. I'm
not exaggerating with saying it's a blessing. You appeared, and it's a blessing. And what I would say is, Winton did it. Jar Wobble did it. You've done it. You've come and you said, I can see you, and I'm not an amazing. You know, I'm playing again now, right? And I'm practicing.
I think you're putting yourself down.
You're like, I can see you. I can see where you are, and that's just a beautiful thing.
I just went down to my wife and said, I'm middle class. I'm not. My dad was a company director, you know, but apart from that, there's so many similarities, like the Archie Shepp thing that you said. You know, I can remember all these very specific things and the way they have an effect on you. I want you back on. The next one we're going to do is going to be about completely different. Let's talk about jazz music, anxiety, depression, and have a chat about that, because your life is really, this is really interesting. You're principled and you're a fighter. And I think you're a much better musician than you're making out, but there's an insecurity there that has driven you in life, and I would love to explore that. And I think a lot of musicians watching this channel will really chime with some of the stuff you've gone through, but you have this very specific thing of your principles of where that's taken you. So I'm going to finish up there now. So I would like to thank you, Sean. That's, you know, absolutely, this is a killer. I'm just going to come up with the right title to get people to. I know if people watch this, it's going to go big, but we just got to draw them in something. So I've got to come up with that clickbaity title. Don't know what to be, you know. I don't know. Can't think of anything at the moment. That's normally I have the title in mind, but anyway, thank you again, Sean.
You really,
and we'll
appreciate
see you again very
it.
soon.
Yeah, bye. Bye. Bye.
So I am now going to give you a bit of a conclusion. Now, is it a conclusion or is it a journey that we're all on? People may call me out for inconsistencies on this channel. They may go back 6 months and see some of the stuff I was saying then around the ideas of identity, race, opinions, for example, about Wynton Marsalis. You know, if you take just that thing, you know, when I started off, I really pointed the finger at Wynton as being the sort of poster boy of this sort of conservative, identity-based, you know, aspects of jazz. And as time has gone on, I have now seen Wynton as being far more of an ally, you know, and this includes, you know, making contact with Jason Marsalis and the conversations I've had with him now. So basically what I'm saying is that, is it a conclusion or are we all on a journey? And by having a discussion and adjusting our viewpoints, right, we can, all of us together, arrive at a place which has been refined through the processes of free speech, but also through the processes of free expression. Free expression, I think, is the other side of free speech. People need to be able to express themselves. They need to be able to, you know, take their view of the world, their personal view of the world, and they need to get it out there. That's so important that we safeguard that. And I think some of the ideologies that are around in our culture today, the way they affect jazz and the way they affect music, it starts to gatekeep. It starts to try and keep people out. It tries to fence things off. It's an attribute of humanity that we have a tendency to want to cooperate, you know, and put our arms around everybody and find out all these incredibly new things, right? And that is the outward looking part of us, but we also have this thing of like trying to control everything and pull it down. And that attribute, which I think is almost linked to sort of like a disgust, it's linked to disgust in our being. Disgust is a reaction we have to things out there that we go, oh, that's a threat, you know, and I don't like that. And there's a tendency then to fence these things off, and that is always there. And what I see in a lot of in certain aspects of modern identity ideology is not the fact that people are making these, you know, things that I don't agree with. It's the fact that there are processes involved which try and make that viewpoint totalitarian in its aspect. In other words, it tries to fence it off so these things cannot be questioned. It becomes the truth, the objective, right, ideological, dogmatic truth. And what we've heard with that story is someone railing against that. And I believe we should rail against that. Because what we're trying to protect here is we're trying to protect the very values that created jazz, right? The idea of freedom of expression, the idea of tolerance, the idea of how you operate within a group and still get to have your own say, you know, and that not impinge on everybody else, which is fundamentally what sort of the concepts of liberalism is. And that those concepts of liberalism were written into the American Constitution and were used to abolish slavery, right? So what we could see are these values, I think, need to be protected. It's almost like you could simplify this that says, if you think that you are tolerant and you're going to tolerate all different opinions, you're going to open your arms to all the different races and genders and ideologies and all these things, we're going to try and all work together. The one thing you cannot tolerate is intolerance. That is a philosophical quandary, right? That is the esoteric part of being liberal and tolerant, is that if you are, then you have to tolerate. You cannot tolerate intolerance, right? That is basically the definition of being tolerant. You tolerate everything except intolerance. Now, I think some of the people who are in opposition to that, they are not coming from that place. They're coming from a different place, where they are seeing what they believe is almost being like an objective truth, right? And they feel morally in a position, because they think they are correct, objectively correct, and it can't be questioned, that anybody who is questioning that is heretical, and they need to not only be shut down, but they need to be wiped out, right? And every totalitarian system, all of them, right and left, all of them have always had to get their opinion to be objective, they've always had to knock out anybody who disagreed, right? It's a recipe for genocide, right? This separatism is a recipe for genocide. How does this relate to jazz? Because jazz in itself is the complete opposite of that. If we look at the history of jazz, jazz was so often used against totalitarian groups. You know, the Nazis hated jazz. You know, jazz was something that reached out into communist countries, and we had musicians like Jan Hammer and who else would it have been? Like you know, where I can't think of anybody else. Sorry, I'm making this up on the top of my head. But you know, where jazz reached into communist countries, totalitarian, and it sent the message. It acted as a counterbalance. It acted as like the seed of something beautiful, you know. And I think our morality, as I've said over and over again, our morality is based fundamentally in what we find is beautiful. All right. And for me, I am always moved, knowing all the differences between us. I think we're all moved when we see people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different genders, sexual orientation. When we see people getting on, holding hands with each other, that is a very moving and beautiful thing. And so I wanted to finish up that I'm hoping that the place where me and Sean are coming from, that people can see on this video, that is the place we're coming from with this, right? Now, I don't think because we're trying to oppose a dogmatic ideology, our opinions have to be able to be shifted. And so when I say this is my conclusion, it's not my conclusion. I am learning myself as I go on this journey with this YouTube, and I explore these ideas, and I have conversations with people. I put videos out and people put stuff in the comments. I am finding more and more that I am refining my viewpoint on it. And what I'm really, more than anything, I'm realizing the incredible achievement of jazz musicians creatively in the last 150 years, and the incredible achievement of black American musicians within that, and how so much in our culture artistically has been influenced by that, and the aesthetic cultural aspects of our society is where the real worth of our society is. It's not in truth, it's in beauty. And that is something I want to try and get across on this channel. And it's really hard to explain that. And so I keep chipping away at it, and I keep refining my own viewpoint of that. So this video has been polemical. I hope you enjoyed that story with Sean. I'm going to have Sean back again. Incredible guy that I've met through this channel. You know, absolutely incredible. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've got to now come up with some clickbaity title and snappy thumbnail to get people to watch this, because I really do want people to watch this, because a lot of these videos on YouTube that deal with identity, they're in a certain realm, aren't they? We all know what that realm is, you know, and it ends up with a big argument. And I get frustrated when, you know, you see someone on the right and the left and they're just trying to win the argument. But this place isn't that. You're all here because you love music, and I'm sure there's some people, and I'm sure they're not at the end of this video now, but I will say I'm very aware that there will be people going, I don't come to your channel, Andy, to hear about your political beliefs. I come to you know, hear you talk about music, and I don't think you know about that. I think you know about music, but you're stepping outside of your knowledge. Well, the truth is, I did a degree in fine art when I was at college, and that was in the 80s, and we got taught a lot of postmodernist philosophy, because postmodernism actually is a very interesting way of looking at art, right? And I'm actually quite influenced by, even though I'm not postmodernism, but out of postmodernism has come a lot of these theories. I have been studying that for 30 years. I've been in contact with philosophers. I've had 30 years with an interest in this as well. So, but I am not a philosopher. I'm a musician. I'm a drummer. It's even worse. I'm not even a musician. I'm a drummer. So, that's a joke, by the way. It's sort of a joke. I've put myself off now. So, where are we? And this is supposed to be serious. This is a serious video. I've lost my thread now. You can put yourself off, you see. There is no conclusion. Right? We're on a journey. Okay? That is what is on this channel. And if you feel I should not be talking about these things, well, I think I should, because I think music represents something, and the things it represents could be under attack at the moment. I put recently I put videos out on the education system here, and I can see a prolonged and effective attack on creative education here. There's stuff going on, and you have to get involved. You have to roll your sleeves up and get involved in the discussion. So if anyone thinks I'm going to sit here and just go on about, you know, Genesis or, you know, the Brecker Brothers' best albums, I am going to do that, but I'm also going to go here as well. So if you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But I'm still going to do it anyway. I think I got to the video now. Big thank you to Sean. He's a fantastic guy. I've chatted to him quite a bit before we did this interview. He's a fantastic guy, interesting guy, very intelligent. He is deep within this, has a deep love of jazz, and, you know, like us all. Anyway, so it wasn't much of a conclusion, was it? Anyway, if you did like this, and you have, I mean, how long is this video now? I'm making longer and longer videos. Every now and then I say to myself, you know, just shorten them, get back to 20 minutes. No one wants to sit here and listen to you going on for an hour and a half. And then I get so involved in the stories and the ideas that come out of doing this YouTube that I have to hit you hard with a big long epic. But we like epics, don't we? Anyway, we're done. Thanks for watching. If you liked, please like it. If you want to see more like this, subscribe and put in the comments that you like it, so I know I'll do some more. You can ring the notification bell. If you want to support me doing this, because as you know now, I'm no communist. I'm a full-on capitalist, I am, and I want your money. So if you want to support me, and I'll exchange what I can with you. So if you want to go through that capitalistic exchange with me, you can join my Patreon and go over there and get all those goodies. But if you are more of a left-wing bent and you do want to distribute your wealth out to the less worthy and less privileged, which is me at this moment in time, you can go and stick some money into my my PayPal tip jar, and then that's just money that I can go and try and support myself doing these YouTube videos, which is really helping out at the moment. And I thank everybody who has donated money to me through that method. You know, isn't it a wonderful world where, you know, some people value some middle-aged idiots waffling on And they value that, and they could actually pay me for waffling on. It's a wonderful thing, you see, because, you know, commodities aren't what you think. You know, in the end, the most valuable thing is ideas. That's the most valuable thing we have, not gold, you know, not the stock market. It's ideas. That's why we're here. Oh, my back's hurting. I've been sat down too long doing too many interviews today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.